6-year-old girl whispered a secret in a hospital hallway, and the nurse who heard it carried a past no one in that small town could imagine. What Lily Reyes said about her father would be dismissed by every adult around her, except one. By the end of that night, the quiet nurse and the worn blue scrubs would prove that some warnings are too important to ignore. Hit like if this story moved you, leave a comment telling me where in the world you are listening from, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Welcome to the Navy SEAL Nurse Stories. Lily Reyes counted the ceiling tiles above bed 204, 14 across, 9 down. She had counted them 11 times since her daddy stopped talking right. Her mother was in the hallway on the phone with the insurance company, voice tight and low. The doctor with the crossed arms stood by the door, checking his watch. Nobody was looking at Lily. Lily was looking at the nurse. The nurse had kind eyes and a ponytail that swung when she moved fast, which she did a lot. Her name tag said Holt, RN. She checked machines. She checked lines. She checked Daddy's pulse with 2 fingers instead of the little clip machine, like she didn't trust the numbers unless her own hands agreed with them. Lily had learned that grown-ups only half listen to kids. They nodded and said, "Uh-huh," while looking at their phones. But Nurse Holt looked at her. Really looked. The way Daddy used to before the accident, before the moving in, before everything got quiet and careful in their house. So when the nurse leaned down to check the IV bag hanging by Lily's chair, Lily made her decision. She cupped her hand around the nurse's ear the way you do for the biggest secrets, the ones that could get someone in trouble if the wrong person heard. "He hurts Daddy when you leave," Lily whispered. Sarah Holt went very still. "Who does, sweetheart?" she whispered back, careful to keep her face neutral. Neutral was a skill. She had learned it a long time ago, in rooms far more dangerous than this one. Lily's eyes flicked to the door, to the hallway beyond it. "Uncle Tommy. He's nice when Mom's home. He's not nice when she's not." The door opened. A man stepped in. Broad-shouldered, easy smile, a 6-pack of energy drinks under one arm like he'd just come from the vending machine. "Hey, kiddo. You telling secrets?" Lily's whole body changed. Shoulders up, chin down, silent. Sarah had spent 6 years reading rooms like this one for a living, back when the stakes were fugitives with warrants and the walls were courtroom hallways instead of hospital corridors. She knew what she was looking at. A child's nervous system rewriting itself in real time, the way it does around a threat it cannot name out loud. "I was just telling her the ceiling tiles are boring," Lily said too fast, too rehearsed. Sarah smiled at her, easy, unbothered on the surface. "They really are. I've counted them too." The man, Tommy apparently, laughed and dropped into the chair by the window, cracking open a can like he owned the room. Sarah made herself walk out at a normal pace, check the next patient, breathe. Inside, a switch had flipped that had been dormant for 3 years. She had been Deputy U.S. Marshal Sarah Holt once, trained to read the small, involuntary signs a controlled person gives off around their controller. A held breath. A flinch that isn't quite a flinch. She had left the marshal's service after a case went wrong. A witness had gone quiet exactly like Lily just had, and Sarah had believed the story the adults around him told her, instead of believing the silence itself. He'd ended up in a hospital. She had ended up here, telling herself scrubs were a safer way to protect people. She had been wrong about that too, apparently. At the nurse's station, Dr. Marcus Webb reviewed charts with the crispness of a man who had a hospital fundraiser to attend in 90 minutes. Staff Sergeant Daniel Reyes, Purple Heart, 2 tours, was a small-town celebrity, and his family's foundation had just funded a new pediatric wing. "Vitals on Reyes are stable enough for discharge tomorrow if the cardiac panel comes back clean," Webb said, without looking up. "Try not to make this complicated, Holt." "I need 30 seconds, Sarah said. "You have 15. I've got the Reyes Foundation gala tonight. His daughter just told me someone is hurting him at home. When the wife's not there." Webb finally looked up, and his expression did something Sarah recognized instantly. Not surprise. Calculation. Kids say things. Custody stress. Half of them make up stories. This isn't a made-up story. I've seen kids do that. This isn't that. Sergeant Reyes is a decorated combat veteran being treated for a training injury. Webb said, voice going flat and final, the tone of a man closing a door. His family has given this hospital more than you will ever understand. I am not opening an investigation into a war hero based on a 6-year-old's bad dream. I'm not asking you to open an investigation. I'm asking you to look at his bruising pattern. His bruising pattern is consistent with a fall from a ladder, which is the story in the chart, which is the story his wife gave, which is the story I am going with. Webb closed the folder. Do your job, nurse. Let me do mine. He walked away before she could answer. Sarah stood at the station for a long moment, feeling something old and cold settle into her chest. She had heard this exact tone before, in a courthouse hallway, from a supervisor who had a budget to protect, and a schedule to keep, and no room in either for an inconvenient truth from someone small. She pulled Daniel Reyes's chart anyway. The story was clean on paper. Fall from a ladder while clearing gutters 3 days ago. Bruising to the ribs and abdomen consistent with blunt trauma. Except Sarah had spent years learning to read injury patterns the way other people read handwriting. And what she saw on that chart did not look like one fall. It looked like repetition. Layered bruising in different stages of healing, clustered on the torso where clothing hides it. None on the hands or forearms where a person bracing for a fall would show marks. Someone had been hitting this man carefully for a while. And his 6-year-old daughter had just told the only person in this hospital who might actually believe her. Sarah went back into room 204, where Tommy sat sprawled in the recliner, phone in hand, boots up on the rail of a bed that wasn't his. Daniel Reyes lay still, eyes half open. A decorated soldier who had walked through gunfire in another country and now flinched, almost imperceptibly, every time the door opened. Sarah had seen that flinch before too. She just hadn't wanted to name it yet. Mr. Reyes, she said gently, adjusting his IV with hands that did not shake, even though something in her chest had gone tight and electric. I'm going to check your ribs again. Is that all right? Daniel's eyes moved to Tommy, quick, reflexive, checking for permission the way a soldier checks a perimeter. Tommy didn't look up from his phone. Daniel's eyes came back to Sarah, and for 1/2 second, something passed between them that had nothing to do with medicine. It was recognition. Not of who she used to be. Of what she was seeing. Sure, Daniel said quietly. Go ahead. Sarah lifted the edge of his gown, professional, unhurried, and looked at the bruising along his ribs with the eyes of someone who had spent 6 years learning exactly how force travels through a human body when someone wants it to look accidental. This was not a ladder. This was a pattern. And patterns, Sarah knew better than almost anyone alive, do not stop on their own. Sarah documented the bruising with careful clinical language, the kind that would hold up if anyone ever needed it to. She photographed nothing. Hospital policy required a formal order for that, and Webb had already made his position clear. So she wrote dates, locations, measurements. The quiet paper trail of someone who had learned, the hard way, that memory fades, but a chart does not. Tommy noticed her lingering. You spend a lot of time in here for a guy who fell off a ladder, he said, not quite looking at her, thumb still moving across his phone screen. Occupational hazard. I like my patients breathing. Sarah kept her voice light, easy, the voice of a tired nurse and nothing more. It was a costume she had worn for 3 years now, and she had gotten good at it. He's tougher than he looks, war hero and all that. Tommy smiled, and there was something underneath the smile that Sarah recognized from 100 interrogation rooms. Charm deployed as a weapon, charm as a door closing softly instead of slamming. Must be proud of him, Sarah said. Somebody's got to hold this family together while he's got his episodes. Tommy's eyes flicked toward Daniel, and for half a second the charm dropped entirely, replaced by something flat and proprietary, the look of a man checking on property rather than a brother checking on family. PTSD's a hell of a thing. Makes him forget what's good for him. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Lily, in her chair by the window, went very still again. The ceiling tile stillness. The stillness of a child who has learned that stillness is safety. Sarah left the room before her face could give anything away. At 9:47 p.m., the monitor in room 204 began to scream. Sarah was 3 doors down and reached the room in 11 seconds, years of training compressing panic into pure, clean motion. Daniel Reyes was gray, sweat beading on his forehead, his blood pressure collapsing on the screen in real time. 88/52, then 76/40, his pulse thin and racing and wrong. Systolics dropping, he's tachycardic, jugulars distended, Sarah said, already moving, already cutting his gown open, already listening to heart sounds that were muffled and far away in a way that made her stomach drop. A resident burst in behind her, young, competent, terrified. What is this? Beck's triad, distended neck veins, muffled heart sounds, hypotension. Sarah's hands were steady even as her pulse climbed. It's tamponade. Blood's filling the sac around his heart and it's squeezing it shut. From a ladder fall 3 days ago? The resident said, disbelieving. From repeated blunt trauma to the chest wall over an extended period, Sarah said, and did not elaborate, because there was no time and because some truths needed to wait their turn. He needs decompression now, or he arrests in the next 2 minutes. Dr. Webb's at the gala, he's 40 minutes out, the on-call surgeon's in the OR. Then it's us. Sarah's voice dropped into a register the resident had never heard from her before, flat and absolutely certain, a voice built for rooms where hesitation got people killed. I need an 18-gauge spinal needle, betadine, and a syringe. Now. The resident froze for exactly 1 second, staring at a nurse who was suddenly speaking like she owned the room. Now, Sarah said again, and something in her tone moved him. Lily stood in the doorway, having slipped past the chaos unnoticed, watching the woman with the kind eyes and the swinging ponytail transform into something else entirely. Steady hands, flat voice, no fear anywhere in her body. Lily did not know the word for what she was seeing. She only knew that for the first time since the accident, someone in this hospital looked like they could actually stop the bad thing from happening. Sarah located the landmark below the xiphoid process, angled the needle toward the left shoulder at 45 degrees, and advanced with a slow, deliberate pressure that came from a place far older than her nursing license. A place built in field exercises and real deployments, where the nearest surgeon was an ocean away, and your own 2 hands were the only surgery available. Talk to me the second you see the tracing change, she said to the monitor tech, voice never wavering. Blood, dark and thick, began to fill the syringe. 30 milliliters. 60. On the monitor, Daniel's blood pressure began impossibly to climb. 82, 90, 96, his color returning, his breathing easing, his eyes fluttering open with the particular clarity of a man who had just walked back from somewhere very dark. There, Sarah said quietly, exhaling for what felt like the first time in 2 minutes. There you are, Sergeant. The word came out before she could stop it. Sergeant, not a civilian word, a word with rank attached. Spoken with the automatic precision of someone who had said it 1,000 times before, in briefings and hallways and hospital corridors half a world away. The resident stared at her. The monitor tech stared at her. And in the doorway, Daniel Reyes, still pale, still shaking, looked at the nurse who had just pulled him back from the edge of his own chest and said the only thing that made any sense to him in that moment. You've done this before. In the field. It wasn't a question. Sarah didn't answer him directly. She couldn't, not yet. Not with a resident and a monitor tech standing there, and a hallway full of questions about to start forming. You're stable, she said instead, checking his pressure again, watching the numbers hold. That's what matters right now. But Daniel wasn't looking at his monitor anymore. He was looking at her hands, steady through all of it, and at the calm that had settled over her like a second skin the moment the alarm went off. Field medic, he said quietly, almost to himself. You're not just a nurse. I'm exactly the nurse standing between you and a cardiac arrest, Sergeant. Let's focus on that. Word moved through Cedar Hollow Regional the way it always did in a building with 200 employees and 1 cafeteria. Fast and slightly wrong by the 3rd telling. By the time Dr. Webb screeched into the parking lot in his gala tuxedo, the story had already become the nurse who saved the war hero with a spinal needle and no backup. Webb found Sarah at the nurse's station, charting with the same unhurried calm she'd had in the room. You performed an emergency pericardiocentesis, without a physician present, without my authorization. His voice was pitched low, furious, gala bow tie hanging loose around his open collar. He had less than 2 minutes before his heart stopped. Dr. Webb, I documented everything. Vitals before, during, after. I'll write the full incident report myself. You could lose your license. He could have lost his life. Sarah closed the chart and looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd started at this hospital, she let a fraction of what was underneath the costume show through. You told me a 6-year-old was making up a bad dream. His chest just told a very different story. So did his labs. That bruising pattern doesn't come from one fall, Dr. Webb. It comes from repetition. Webb's jaw tightened. You are not qualified to diagnose abuse. I'm qualified to read a chart and count the pattern. I'm also required by law to report reasonable suspicion. This qualifies. Sarah's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath it now, unmistakable. You can either help me file it correctly, or I file it around you. Your choice. For a long moment, Webb said nothing, calculating, the gala clock still ticking somewhere behind his eyes. Down the hall, Tommy Ellison stood at the nurse's station window, watching the exchange with an expression Sarah caught only in her peripheral vision. The flat, assessing look of a man recalculating a plan that had just gone sideways. That night, after her shift, Sarah drove home and did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She opened the small fireproof box she kept in her closet, beneath a folded set of clothes she never wore anymore, and took out a laminated card with a photograph of a younger version of herself. Deputy U.S. Marshal Sarah Holt. Fugitive apprehension. Task Force, Eastern District. The card was expired. The training underneath it wasn't. She ran the name Thomas Ellison through every database her old contacts could still access. It took less than an hour to find what she already suspected. 2 prior domestic violence complaints in another state, both withdrawn before charges stuck. A pattern of moving in with vulnerable family members. A sister with a chronic illness. An elderly uncle before that. Always the helpful relative. Always controlling the finances within months. Always gone before anyone built a case. And an outstanding bench warrant, 11 months old, for failure to appear on an assault charge 3 states away. Sarah sat back and felt something settle into place that had nothing to do with medicine. Tommy Ellison wasn't just hurting his brother. He was a documented pattern, moving house to house, family to family, and Cedar Hollow was simply his next stop. Lily hadn't imagined anything. Lily had been more accurate than every adult in that hospital combined. The next morning, Sarah returned to work with a folder under her arm and a decision already made. She was done being only the nurse in room 204. Some part of her, the part that had left a witness unprotected once and never forgiven herself for it, was not going to make that mistake twice. Sarah requested a meeting with hospital administration before her shift, and Webb was already there, along with the chief of staff, Dr. Patricia Okafor, who had a reputation for not caring whose gala invitation was on the line. I have a documented bruising pattern inconsistent with the reported mechanism of injury, Sarah said, sliding the folder across the table. I have a child's disclosure of ongoing abuse, given voluntarily and unprompted. And I have an outstanding warrant on the individual with unsupervised access to the patient and his daughter. She kept her voice clinical, even though every word of it mattered more than almost anything she'd said in 3 years. This meets the threshold for mandatory reporting. I've already called it in. Adult Protective Services and county law enforcement are both aware. Webb's face went through several colors. You called them before this meeting. I called them the moment I confirmed the warrant. I wasn't going to sit on it while we discussed optics, Dr. Webb. Sarah's eyes didn't leave his. A man's chest was filling with blood in that room. I'm not interested in protecting anyone's gala schedule over that. Dr. Okafor studied Sarah for a long moment, something sharpening behind her eyes. You ran a background check on a family member. That's not standard nursing procedure. No, Sarah agreed. It isn't. Where did you learn to do that? Sarah hesitated, just for a breath, weighing 3 years of careful anonymity against the 6-year-old girl currently sitting in a hospital chair believing correctly that no one was coming to help her. "Before I was a nurse," she said quietly, "I was a Deputy United States Marshal. Fugitive apprehension. I spent 6 years learning exactly how someone like Thomas Ellison operates, and exactly what it costs a family when nobody catches it in time." The room went silent. Webb opened his mouth and closed it again. "I left the Marshal's service because I missed a warning sign once," Sarah continued, and this time her voice did shake, just slightly, just enough to prove it was true. "A witness under my protection went quiet, and I believed the story the people around him told me, instead of believing the silence itself. He ended up in a hospital bed because of what I missed. I am not doing that again. Not to this family." Down the hallway, unaware that his name was on a table between 3 hospital officials, Tommy Ellison walked into room 204 carrying a duffel bag. "Time to go home, bro," he said to Daniel, already pulling at the IV tape on his arm. "Discharge paperwork's basically done. I already talked to your wife. She's meeting us there." Daniel, still weak, still pale, tried to sit up. The doctor said 48 hours of observation. "Tommy? Doctor's not the one who's been carrying this family for 6 months. Tommy's voice had lost its charm entirely now, flattened into something hard and possessive. "You're fine. Get up." Lily watched her uncle rip the IV line loose with rough, careless hands, watched her father wince and say nothing, watched the silence fall over the room that she had learned meant something bad was starting. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She screamed for the nurse. Sarah heard it from 2 doors down, dropped the folder on Dr. Okafor's desk mid-sentence, and ran. Sarah reached room 204 in 9 seconds and took in the whole scene in one sweep. Daniel half off the bed, IV line torn and bleeding at the vein, Tommy's hand gripping his brother's upper arm hard enough to leave marks that would join all the others, and Lily pressed against the window glass, small hands over her mouth. "Let go of him," Sarah said, and her voice was the flat, certain voice from the crisis 2 nights ago, the one that made rooms listen. Tommy turned, and for the first time, the charm was gone completely. What was underneath it was cold and calculating and used to getting its way through force when charm failed. "This isn't your business, nurse. Family decision. Federal warrant makes it my business." Sarah stepped fully into the room, positioning herself between Tommy and the bed without seeming to move at all. The way she'd been trained to do it, never obvious, never a straight line, always a body between the threat and the person it wanted. "Thomas Ellison, there's an outstanding bench warrant for you in Marion County. Assault charge. I'd let go of your brother's arm right now if I were you." Something shifted in Tommy's face. A man realizing his cover was gone. "You don't know anything about me. I know you've done this in 2 other houses before this one. I know the pattern. Sister with lupus. 18 months. Gone before anyone built a case. Uncle with a bad hip before that. You find the vulnerable one in a family, you make yourself indispensable, and then you take it out on them where the bruises don't show." Sarah's eyes never left his hands. "I know exactly what you are, Tommy. I spent 6 years hunting men exactly like you." For a half-second, nobody in the room breathed. Then Tommy lunged, not at Sarah but past her, toward Lily by the window, a desperate grab for leverage before the walls closed in. He didn't get 3 feet. Sarah's body reacted before her conscious mind finished the thought, 6 years of training compressing into pure muscle memory. A low pivot, a redirect of his own momentum against him. His arm wrenched up and back in a controlled lock that put him face first against the wall before he understood what had happened. No wasted movement, no excess force. Just precise, professional containment. The kind you only learn from doing it for real, more than once, with consequences that mattered. "Hospital security," Sarah called out, voice carrying clean and steady down the hallway. "And someone get the deputy who's already on his way up from the front desk." Because he was already on his way, Sarah had called county law enforcement the moment she confirmed the warrant that morning, and the deputy had been waiting in the parking lot for exactly this kind of moment. 2 security guards arrived first. Then the deputy, badge out, cuffs already in hand. He took one look at Sarah's hold on Tommy's arm, the clean textbook precision of it, and paused. "Ma'am, that's a federal apprehension technique." "I used to be federal," Sarah said, releasing Tommy into the deputy's custody with the calm efficiency of someone finishing a task, rather than someone who'd just physically stopped a man from grabbing a child. Deputy U.S. Marshal Sarah Holt, retired. "You'll want to note that in your report, this individual has priors in 2 other jurisdictions consistent with a pattern of domestic control and violence against vulnerable family members. I can send you the file." The deputy's eyebrows climbed. Behind him, Daniel Reyes sat up slowly on the edge of the bed, IV line still dripping onto the floor, and looked at the nurse who had just taken his brother down with the same hands that had saved his heart 2 nights earlier. "You're really not just a nurse," he said. And this time, there was something like relief in it, 3 years of silence finally cracking open. "No," Sarah admitted, crossing the room to check on Lily, kneeling down to the girl's eye level, her voice softening into something warmer, something meant just for her. "I'm not. But I heard you, sweetheart. I heard every word. And I'm so sorry it took this long for someone to." Lily's small arms came around Sarah's neck, and for the first time in the 2 days Sarah had known her, the girl cried like a child finally allowed to feel something other than careful. By the following week, the full picture had come together. Marion County confirmed the warrant. 2 other jurisdictions opened new inquiries once Sarah's file reached the right desks, and a pattern that had followed 3 families across 3 states finally had a name attached to consequences instead of just a quiet exit before anyone noticed. Tommy Ellison would not be moving in with anyone else for a long time. Dr. Webb faced a very different kind of reckoning. The hospital board reviewed his handling of the initial disclosure, and Dr. Okafor made it clear, in a meeting Sarah wasn't in the room for but heard about within the hour, that dismissing a child's report of abuse to protect a donor relationship was not a judgment call the hospital would be defending. Webb kept his job. He did not keep his easy authority, and every nurse on that floor noticed the difference. Daniel Reyes recovered fully, his heart healed clean, his ribs healing slower but healing. He filed for a protective order the same week, something he told Sarah quietly he should have done 8 months earlier, back when the flinching started and he told himself it was nothing. "I kept telling myself I survived worse overseas," he said, sitting up in a chair by the window instead of the bed now, Lily curled against his side. "I didn't think it counted if it happened at my own kitchen table." "It always counts," Sarah told him. "Your daughter knew that before any of the adults around her did." Lily, for her part, had stopped counting ceiling tiles. She spent her last afternoon at Cedar Hollow Regional, drawing a picture instead. A girl with a ponytail standing very tall next to a hospital bed, both of them smiling. She handed it to Sarah without a word, and threw her arms around her waist instead, which said everything the drawing hadn't. "You're the reason people believed me," Lily said into her scrubs. "You're the reason I remembered how to listen," Sarah said back, and meant every word of it. That night, alone in her apartment, Sarah opened the fireproof box again, but this time she didn't put the laminated card away. She set it on the shelf where she could see it, not as a piece of a life she'd buried, but as proof of something she'd spent 3 years trying to forget wasn't a weakness at all. The training hadn't been the problem. Ignoring her own instincts once had been. She thought about the doors that might open now that her real history was on record. Then she thought about Lily's drawing on the kitchen table, a girl with a ponytail standing tall, and decided, quietly, to stay exactly where she was. Not because the badge hadn't mattered. It had. It was why she'd known what she was looking at the moment a 6-year-old whispered 11 words every other adult had been ready to dismiss. But there was a kind of protecting that only happened at eye level, in a hospital chair, with a child who needed one person to actually listen. She decided she'd rather spend the next part of her life catching warning signs up close, before anyone needed hunting at all. She proposed a new protocol to Dr. Okafor the following month. A simple training module on how to really listen when a child says something that doesn't fit the story on the chart. Not every warning comes wrapped in evidence. Sometimes it comes as 11 whispered words from someone small enough that a room forgets to take her seriously. Cedar Hollow Regional adopted it within the year, and named it, at Dr. Okafor's insistence, the Lily Protocol. Somewhere in that small hospital, a girl who once counted ceiling tiles to survive the silence had changed the way an entire building listened to its smallest patients. And the nurse who heard her first went back to work the next morning in the same worn scrubs, counting vitals instead of warrants, having finally forgiven herself for the one time she hadn't listened closely enough.